the NDP candidate does show up.
Okay. There's a bottle of water here for you too. Wasn't me. Didn't touch it. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started right away here. It is 6 o'clock, and we want to make sure we have enough time for questions, so we're going to get started right away. Welcome, everyone, to the 2019 Federal Election Forum for the Edmonton-Wetaskiwin riding. My name is Lisa Vanderquack. I'm the past president of the Beaumont Chamber of Commerce. So before we begin, I just want to remind you to take your cell phone out of your pocket right now. If you could please put it on mute or turn it off completely, whatever you need to do so it's not a distraction. And if you do have to take a conversation, we would just ask that you kindly leave the room and go outside to take it so that there's no distracting noise. Also, be mindful of any conversations where you're seated so that there's no distraction for the candidates and for other people being able to hear. If you haven't already received one of these cards when you came in, you can raise your hand if you do want to submit a question to the candidates. We would ask that you please kindly write it on the card and address it to all of the candidates. So not just one specific candidate, but a question that's pertinent to all the candidates to be able to answer. As well, we will be collecting these at 6:45. When you are finished and want it to be collected, just simply raise your hand with the card in it, and then one of our volunteers here will take it from you. We want to thank the City of Beaumont for their support in ensuring that there's quality video and audio streamed live for our viewers at home. So we are having a number of people watching online, which is fantastic. So now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our candidates and their respective party. So to my immediate left is Neil Dole from the People's Party of Canada. And then we have Mike Lake from the Conservative Party of Canada. And then we have Richard Wong from the Liberal Party of Canada. And we had two of the parties not here tonight. One, Emily Dresmala from the Green Party declined, and Noah Garver from the NDP Party has not yet arrived. So no show as of now. So I'd like to welcome our mayor, John Stewart, to welcome us here and to say a few words.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Federal Candidates Forum on behalf of the City of Beaumont and on behalf of Council. I'm pleased to welcome you here tonight. I see the 2-minute timer just started. I thought that not being a candidate would get me away from having to do that, but here we go, I guess. We'll see if the mic cuts off. It's a pleasure to host the candidates and all of you here tonight in the Beaumont Community Centre. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Chamber for organizing this event, and thank you for making it out to ask the candidates questions and to listen thoughtfully to their positions. Fair and open elections are a foundation of Canadian democracy. But democracy doesn't start and end with the ballot box. It's our constitutional right to gather at events like this and engage in a free discussion about our nation and its government. It's also our responsibility as citizens to participate in our communities and stay engaged on important topics. Tonight, we will hear a range of proposed solutions and approaches for our country and our community. I hope that the discussion is spirited, open, and honest, and if I can ask one thing of everyone, it's that we show each other respect. In this time of social media and political polarization, I think it's important to remember we all have the same goals regardless of affiliation. We all want safe, healthy communities, secure, good-paying jobs, a good life for our families, and the opportunity to both better ourselves and work towards our dreams. We may have different ideas about how to accomplish these goals, but these are the values we all share as neighbors, Albertans, and Canadians. It takes a lot of courage to get up in front of everyone and discuss your vision for our community and our country. So I implore you to challenge these candidates in their position, but please give them the same respect that you would give your family and neighbors. Most importantly, please remember to vote in the advance polls or on October 21st. We have the right to a voice in Canadian democracy. Let's use it. Thank you and enjoy the forum. And I still got 8 seconds. Thank you.
Well done. All right, now I'd like to introduce our moderator for the evening, Mr. Ken Cobley, who is the Alberta Chamber of Commerce President. Let's welcome Mr. Cobley.
Well, thanks, Lisa. It's really nice to be here, and I know that there's a lot of friends in the crowd. I don't want any trouble from any of my friends. Perry. There's also one other thing I'd like you to join with me in acknowledging the Beaumont and District Chamber of Commerce for being selected as the Alberta Chamber of the Year in their size category at our last AGM. Congratulations to you guys. Okay, so to the candidates, we have a timer out there that shows your countdown clock. You have 3 minutes for opening statements, 3 minutes for closing statements, and 1 minute for your response. We will be really in control of that clock. Please don't make me have to cut you off. And again, the timer's right out there. We would ask that members of the members of the audience that are here, please listen respectfully without interrupting. I would mention to you that if a candidate does get interrupted by comments from the floor, I will restart their timer so they will actually get extra time. Okay, so just bear that in mind. If a candidate is interrupted by people applauding mid-response, they're chewing up their own time, so their clock will not be restored. We would ask everyone to avoid speculation, defamation, or inflammatory language. And again, please hold your applause until all the candidates have answered the question. If you have, we will have some questions right off the get-go that are going to be asked that were submitted online. I have them here. If you have a written question you'd like to submit, there are forms, cards available from Sasha and over here. Please write down your question. Please make sure that it's directed to all candidates and just hold your hand up. We'll be collecting those questions until about 6:45. We will wrap up sharply at 8. That's pretty much what we have for opening. So what we're going to do right now is get right into the opening statements. The order of the opening statements were drawn earlier, and the first person to speak will be Neil Dole with the People's Party of Canada. You want to come over here?
Hello, everyone. I have made it to some of your doors over the last few weeks, and there are a lot of doors out there, so it's great to see you all here, and I'll try to say a quick hello at your place in the next few weeks. We are here to present the different policies being offered by our parties. The People's Party of Canada offers bold policy that gives us a chance to do politics differently. If elected, I will fight for the policies our party has put forward, because I believe in them. With the questions and answers tonight, we will get some time to look a little deeper into our platforms, but I'll run through some key points right now. The People's Party of Canada believes in people, and that is why our policies focus on people to build our future, collectively, by building their futures independently. I believe in individual freedom, personal responsibility, respect, and fairness. These are the pillars that uphold our platform. When given freedom, we must act responsibly to be successful. Freedom such as encouraging people to debate their positions, allow us to find better solutions, and to understand differences. This is something only the PPC promotes. Freedom such as returning power back to provinces, allow local people to make local decisions on healthcare, is something only the People's Party offers. Some areas are federal jurisdiction. The People's Party of Canada is the only party that will use the power of the Constitution, Section 9210, to declare interprovincial pipelines to be for the general advantage of Canada, thereby giving the federal government this jurisdiction and not allow a veto power to a small, often foreign-funded special interest groups, drastically harming the Canadian economy. The People's Party would phase out supply management, which currently allows cartels to determine the supply and price of milk, cheese, chicken, eggs, and turkey, and costs the average family over $400 a year. All of the other parties support this current system. The People's Party will fix the equalization system and stop contributing to decades-long welfare state of some of our provinces. We will incentivize them to build their economies and develop their resources. Hundreds of billions of dollars have left Alberta to the federal government over the decades that haven't returned in services. This happened over repeated versions of both the Liberal and Conservative governments. We would balance the budget in 2 years. We wouldn't push it out and blame the previous government, we would just get it done. The People's Party of Canada will also cut individual taxes and corporate taxes and capital gains taxes. How can we cut taxes and balance the budget? By cutting corporate welfare and ending wasteful billions in foreign spending. This is at least 10 to 20 billion in savings from just 2 categories. During the Q&A, we can also cover climate change, firearms, clean drinking water and reserves, UN-imposed globalism, freedom of expression, immigration, and the Canadian identity and culture that it contributes to, our veterans and internal trade, and hopefully a bunch of important random questions that we didn't see coming. Thank you.
Good job. Sets the bar high for the rest of the candidates to keep within the time limit. Actually, I got Richard coming up next. Richard Wong.
Good evening, folks. My name is Richard Wong, and I want to represent you, the good people of Edmonton-Wetaskiwin, as its Liberal candidate in this upcoming general election. I have a vision for Canada that is more than the hewer of wood and the drawer of water. Yes, oil and gas is very important to our country, to Alberta. But we must capitalize on it wisely and safely. We must also give absolute full support to other industries, such as agriculture, green energy, medical research, and new technologies. Only then will we escape the boom and bust cycle in our local economy. As a Liberal, I believe in free enterprise. I want a robust business sector, especially small businesses. I welcome foreign investments and more free trade. I want hard-working Canadians to reap the rewards of their hard work and ingenuity and enjoy the middle-class lifestyle. For big businesses and the wealth they created, all the stakeholders and contributors of that wealth must be entitled to a share of that good fortune. We must find the right balance. I believe we must have excellence in education, from preschool to post-secondary. It has to be a national obsession, education. Less but more efficient government. This is a no-brainer. Every party, I'm sure, agreed to that point. Simplify the overall taxation system and close the loopholes for those who want to avoid taxes. This is simply not fair for the average Canadians. While we look ahead to the future, we must not forget the past. We must treat our seniors with respect they deserve. It was they who built this high standard of living that we Canadians enjoy today. Hard work was put in, whether in the field, the factories. Families were encouraged and nurtured, and the many social programs they fought for, and they had to do it with great effort. The issues affecting seniors, including cost of living, adjustment, pensions, health, housing problems, elderly abuse, among many others. So in summation, I see ourselves as just not Albertans, but Canadians through and through. We have to sit at the table, we have to eat together, we have to exchange ideas, and hope for a common purpose in what we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. Next, we'll hear from Mike Lake, Conservative Party of Canada.
Well, thank you very much, and it has been an absolute honor and privilege to serve the people of Beaumont for the last 13 years as your Member of Parliament. This is my 5th election campaign, and of the 5 election campaigns I've fought, this is by far the most fired up I've seen constituents. There is nothing sadder than going to a door, being answered by a 58-year-old man who has tears in his eyes as he talks about being unemployed for the last 2 years and wonders how he's going to find a job when things are going to turn around, and largely because of measures that his government has taken. We're in a situation right now where, I don't know if you know this, but when we were last in power in 2015, we had a balanced budget, and spending in Canada was under $300 billion. Today, spending in Canada is over $350 billion, and we're running tens of billions of dollars in deficit at a time when the global economy is strong. And constituents at the doors don't understand how, in this context, running these deficits, we can possibly be turning off the taps to revenues that this country desperately needs to keep people working. Revenues that we need to fund our education system and our healthcare system and social services that are important. Revenues that we actually need to fund our environmental measures, things that we're going to be able to do, new technologies that we can export around the world. We're in a stage in our existence when, while 4 years ago we had 3 pipeline projects that were well underway towards being approved, now we have none. We're in a situation where the government had to spend $4.5 billion to buy a pipeline. And this in a context of a global environment where the world is still using oil. And I think a lot of people, even people who care desperately about the environment, we all want an environment that's going to be there for the long term for our kids and for our grandkids. But people don't understand why we would vacate the market while the world's using oil, rob ourselves of the revenues we need to create world-leading technology, and instead allow that market to be occupied by Russia and Iran and Iraq and Algeria and Nigeria and countries like that, all of whom are also among the top 10 exporting countries in the world. So this is what I'm hearing at the doors. This is what has people fired up. And I love quotes. I'm going to read one supportive quote. This is a supporter who in 2018 said, "Mike and I have worked closely together since 2006, and honestly, I don't know anyone who works harder. We served on the same cabinet committee on successful efforts to balance the budget by 2015, partnered on an initiative to cut red tape for small business, and co-organized a visit by Alberta business leaders to Quebec." Who was this leader that had these words to say? It was Maxime Bernier, the Member of Parliament for Beauce in 2018. Thank you.
Okay, we're off to a good start. All the candidates stayed in the time limit. So again, we're going to get into the question period. And we will be rotating who gets to answer the question first. I would ask the candidates to remain where you're seated and just answer from there, okay? First question is on the topic of transportation. Improving Canada's ability to move national resources across Canada would decrease dependence on foreign importation of goods we have readily available. Does your party support national planning and transportation and infrastructure, and will you prioritize projects that are focused on economic outcome for our nation? And we're going to start off this question with Mr. Lake.
Well, thank you. And this is, again, kind of the crux of what I was speaking about earlier. It's absolutely unfathomable to me that in this day and age, in a country that produces the natural resources that we have in Canada, that we're importing between 750,000 and 850,000 barrels of oil every single day in Eastern Canada because we can't build a pipeline to get that oil to market. This is something that is of national importance. It's something that is critical to funding the social programs, the healthcare system, the education system that's so important to Canadians. And all it requires, first it requires common sense regulation and consultation for sure, an environmentally sustainable way of doing things. But then it requires actual will by the federal government to make it happen. This is federal jurisdiction, and it requires a federal government who has the courage to actually take the steps that it takes to ensure that these projects are able to be built.
Thank you. Mr. Dole.
I agree that these are national interest projects, anything traveling interprovincially, as I mentioned. And the People's Party of Canada feel strongly about that we need to ensure these projects proceed and happen and don't get held up. And we'll use the Constitution. Section 9210, as I mentioned in my intro, is part of the Constitution that was used over 400 times, mostly to build railways. Pipelines, for instance, is strongly tied to a railway. Pipelines weren't in the Constitution, but now they're underground railways for us, and they need to be implemented. And we need to have a strong federal government that is willing to do what it takes to make sure that things get built, because it's important for our economy, it's important for our unity to have interprovincial trade and not being held up at one coast or the other. And we need to make sure that happens, and that's what the People's Party of Canada will do.
Mr. Wong?
Too much politics is involved in these decisions, and that's a sad shape of affair in Canada today, I feel. There's no cohesiveness among the provinces and territories. The only thing I can say is that if elected, I am going to push for a common interest for everybody in this country. We need to smarten up and make sure the politicians respond to the needs of Canada as a whole and not individual provinces. We have to think as a country, as a nation, and not 10 divisive provinces and territories. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is under the category of healthcare. If elected, what formula would your party use to determine how much to provide to the provinces to pay for healthcare? Will there be any new conditions with new funding? And we'll start off with Mr. Dole.
It's a big difference between our party and the other parties. Other parties come out and they're promising, among a lot of promises you see, especially over the campaign season here. You see promises of spending and increases. They promise to increase healthcare transfers. The People's Party of Canada promises to cut federal taxes so that provinces can raise money locally and have control over their provincial healthcare, which is provincial jurisdiction. There's no reason to send money to Ottawa to have them decide where the money should come back to. We can keep the money in provinces. We don't have the same needs in Alberta that they have in Atlantic Canada or Quebec or BC or any of the other areas in Canada. We have our own needs, we have our own demographics, and we need to respect those and respect the people voting locally for provincial jurisdiction in healthcare. There's no reason it can't be carried locally as long as the funds are transferred back as well, which our party plans to do, as well as leaving control for people to take control of their own health.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
I'm a little bit confused about the answer there, because he talked at the very end about transferring the funds back, but originally talked about the federal government actually not collecting it in the first place. Our party's been very clear that we will continue the 3% increase in transfers to the provinces for healthcare. Our population is aging, healthcare costs are going up. We consistently increased at a reasonable rate. One of the things that we did when we were in government was ensure that Albertans got their fair share, because before we worked with some of these formulas for some of these transfer programs, transfers weren't made on a per capita basis, and Alberta didn't get our share of transfers. That was something that we corrected when we were in government, but he's right about the fact that healthcare is provincial jurisdiction. Delivery of healthcare, that needs to be made at the provincial level, but the federal government does have a responsibility, and I think Canadians expect that their federal government will continue to properly fund transfers for healthcare, social services, and education within a balanced budget.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
The federal government should be the leaders in providing a high standard of healthcare services. It's no doubt that the jurisdiction is with the provinces, but Ottawa needs to set a high standard. One of the things that the Liberal government is planning to do, of course, is the National Pharmacare Program. So we're going to help people to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. It is so important. We are just paying way, way too much compared to other parts of the world, such as Australia and New Zealand. So, but the leadership has to come from the federal government, and we're going to do our best to make sure everyone in Canada has good access to healthcare system. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is on oil and gas. Other provinces and the federal government have failed to uphold their commitments under federalism, with provincial neighbours opposing pipelines, and there is a lack of effective support from the federal government. How will your party hold other provinces to their commitments under the Canadian Free Trade and New West Partnership trade agreements? We'll start off with Mr. Lake.
Well, we've kind of talked about this a few times so far. I think that we're in a circumstance right now that's untenable. You have Alberta Oil, the revenues of which fund important programs across the country. You have two provinces at either end of the country, BC and Quebec, who have repeatedly blocked that oil from getting to market and allowing us as a country to benefit from the revenues that we would generate if we can sell that oil. That is absolutely not sustainable in the long term. The federal government, the answer is fairly simple. I mean, obviously the federal government needs to conduct proper consultations, and we need to have regulations that protect the environment. But at the same time, once those processes have been put in place and followed, the federal government has to use its power to make sure that pipelines can actually be built. The federal government does have the authority under the Constitution, and it has to have the will to use it.
Mr. Wong?
The Liberal Party of Canada has made the commitment to support the pipeline going out to Tidewater. In fact, we spent about $4.5 billion buying it. So you folks know that we are committed to do that. And we'll do it in a safe manner and environmentally safe manner. Sometimes we talk too much about, in my opinion, too much oil and gas. I know it's so important to our province, but there are other industries that we need to look at too. And there are areas that we're world-class producers of products, such as agricultural products. The market over in East Asia, fantastic for our pork and our beef and our chicken. We have to really expand on those assets too. We cannot miss those opportunities.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
It is important to have a diversified economy, and nothing drives diverse economies like more money being put into an economy. We can use our oil and gas revenues spread to other areas as long as we make sure that they can happen. I've mentioned a couple times with the Section 9210 of the Constitution. It's nice to hear Mr. Lake talk about using federal transfers as well. I haven't heard it on the campaign trail federally from the other parties. We're the only party who's been pronouncing that for over a year now, and we'll make sure that it gets built because it's important to get our oil and gas to Tidewaters so that we can make maximum profits off it and let the other parts of the economy flourish with that added boost. And it's interesting that spending $4.5 billion taxpayer dollars would be thought of as a positive when it could have been done privately as long as we got the regulations out of the way and allowed them to build it themselves.
Thank you. Next question is on climate change. Tell me your party's stance on the future of renewable energy and how your party will support alternative energy sources to reduce demand for fossil fuels. And we'll start off with Mr. Wong.
Well, as you know, our party, first and foremost, is the climate change issue. It is one of the. It is one of what. Excuse me. It is one of the platform that Mr. Trudeau has stressed very importantly, and I back him 100%. The young folks, as you can have heard and seen in the last couple of days, came out in droves, in thousands, to make sure the adults of this nation hear that they are very, very concerned. So absolutely, 100%, I back what the Liberal Party is doing as far as the climate change. And we're going to spend money and research in development in the new technologies to make this a greener country, and we're going to be the leader in that aspect among the world's countries.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
The best people to innovate new solutions for for the climate and in any area are individuals and entrepreneurs and the free market. There's no need for the government to be involved spending billions or some people around the world announcing multi-trillion dollar solutions for a problem that no one can see existing yet. It's all projections coming forward, and you have to worry about what's coming up and panic every day and fear for your lives like other people do, and they come out and pronounce for that. We support clean water and clean air and clean land in our party, and we'll promote that. We won't ruin our economy spending federal government money on solutions and giving it to companies and choosing winners and losers on that. The provinces will be allowed to innovate themselves as well if they want to, but from our party standpoint, it's free enterprise and free market that will find the solutions.
Thank you. Mr. Lake.
I pride myself on having conversations with people, trying to see these types of issues from all sides, and in talking to scientists on the right, scientists on the left, and sort of asking where the common ground is. I'm told by people that know more about this than I do that the common ground is that there's a general consensus that the climate's changing and that humans have some role in causing it. Where the disagreement is how much are humans causing, and what does the modeling show down the road? Our party has come forward and said that a carbon tax that applies only in Canada with very minimal global impact isn't the way to tackle climate change. The way to tackle climate change is rather to take a more global approach, incent individuals and organizations to take clean actions like the green public tax credit, the green home tax credit that we just announced. I'm going to leave it at that because my time's up.
Thank you. Sorry, I picked up a really bad cold on a flight last night, so bear with me. Next question is under the title, Working Together. How will your party foster greater levels of cooperation on environmental issues among First Nations, industry, nonprofits, NGOs, charities, and various provincial and municipal governments? And we'll start off with Mr. Dole.
Consultation is an important part of finding the right solutions, and it's important to allow a free debate on solutions. Our party supports the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and it's important that everyone can speak what they see out in the world environmentally wise and have these conversations with all the various groups to find the right solutions. Our role as a federal government can be to facilitate, to have these discussions. We're building projects that fall under regulations federally, and we need to make sure that all the groups in the final projects meet the safety standards, environmental standards that we've set forward together as people have run on their platforms. But we don't need to get in the way of groups building projects, and we don't need to legislate and put on the back end, such as the Conservative plan, to put on the back end of businesses to force them to hit carbon goals and fund research on that.
Thank you. Mr. Lake.
Well, interestingly, talking about business and a green approach, the green home tax credit that I just talked about will actually benefit businesses as Canadians decide to make investments up to $20,000 in their homes to make renovations. We saw this with the home renovation tax credit during the global slowdown. It had tremendous impact. Canadians chose to make those investments, and they had a tremendous impact on the Canadian economy. If you want to learn a little bit more about Andrew Scheer's vision for the environment, I can't answer that in depth in 1 minute, but he did a series of 5 speeches called My Vision for Canada. So if you just Google My Vision for Canada and Andrew Scheer, one of those speeches was on the environment. He did another one on international trade and internal trade. I would encourage you to check all 5 of them out. It's well worth the watch.
Thank you. Mr. Wong.
My short answer for this is carbon tax is the way to go. I know Albertans do not like the idea. We could call it something else, carbon levy, whatever, but let's get realistic. In the world today, in all the industrial countries in Europe, carbon tax is the way to go because it changes the mindsets of people using carbon-based fuel and energy. And that is the only way that we can reduce the greenhouse effect by having this carbon tax. And remember, this carbon tax, most people are going to get about 90% of it back, and most small companies will get the rebate back. So it's almost a net zero effect. But it is the only way that most scientists, most economists feel it is the best way to curb the climate issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder, if you have a question prepared, hold up your hand and somebody will get it from you. If you want a piece of paper and a pen to write out a question, same deal, hold up your hand and they'll come out to you. All right, next question is under the category of Beaumont. Mr. Mayor, did you rate this? How can your constituents be confident that Alberta's issues and concerns will be represented clearly and effectively while working towards the overall national goals? And I'll go to Mr. Lake first.
Well, I over the time that I've been the member of parliament here, 13 years, I have probably hosted, I think we'll host 50 roundtables this year if I'm elected and have that chance to host a few more after the election. I make it an absolute priority to listen to my constituents and to host 2-hour meetings for anyone that wants to show up. Just get a hold of my office outside of election time, and we'd be glad to get you on the list. And we make an absolute commitment that we'll get everybody that wants to come out. One of the sad things about our system right now is a riding probably with about 180,000 constituents, and over the course of a year I'll have less than 800 of those constituents take part in a roundtable and bother to get engaged in that level of conversation. We need to get more active, and as many of you in the room can attest, I am always available when you want to talk to me about something that's important to you.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
Can you just repeat the question, please?
How can your constituents be confident that Alberta's issues and concerns will be represented clearly and effectively while working towards the overall national goal?
My fear is that I know that this is going to be a blue wave in this province. I'm realistic. So in order to have a voice, let's say the Liberals win the next election, and it's a 50-50 thing right now. We need a voice. We need a voice, a progressive voice in Ottawa. So if it's all blue winners in this province, it's a sad shape of affairs for this province, for this town of Beaumont. So I ask you, I plead you, I need some help from you folks, because we need democracy to work, and the only way it's going to work is if we have some opposition for a positive voice for Alberta and for Beaumont. Thank you.
Mr. Dole?
I'm hoping there's not quite the blue wave that Mr. Wong is predicting. I wouldn't mind seeing the purple rain come. But to make sure our Alberta issues and our local issues are promoted in the federal government in Ottawa, you just have to look to our policies. Our policies speak to Alberta and Alberta values, and that's what we'll be promoting in the federal government. So you don't need to hear promises, election spending, or what we're going to bring to Edmonton-Wetaskiwin. You just look at our policies, go to our websites, check out our policies, and they all speak to Alberta values and the need to build a strong Alberta as part of a strong federation. And that's what you can trust in for our party.
Thank you. Next question is under the heading of business. As an entrepreneur, it is nearly impossible to access funding for small businesses. What is your party going to do to make sure more support is available to entrepreneurs? I'm going to start with Mr. Wong.
Many, many years ago, I started a small business. It was I was hopefully to expand a tailoring shop company, like franchised. I had a shop downtown. I had a shop in Westman Mall. And it's very difficult. Believe me, starting your own business is scary. There's a lot of cash commitment, time commitment. And I can appreciate any entrepreneur trying to go along that. But because I believe in the free enterprise system, how much government do we want involved in that type of situation? No, you have to make the risk, And when you reap the rewards when it comes, then you're happy. Ignore the government for help in those cases. And there's a lot of successful small businesses that are doing extremely well in Alberta today. So, good for them. I really, really admire the small entrepreneurs. And we're including
Thank you.
farmers too.
Mr. Dole?
I agree we should keep the federal government and the governments out of entrepreneurship. People are innovative. They'll put risk in. They'll find capital and promote investment in their products and their services and make sure they build successful companies. We don't need the government in at the start of that. We don't need the government taking half of people's income away either when they're successful. And that's part of our policy is ending corporate welfare specifically. We need to get the government out of picking winners and losers, propping up certain industries while others fail or while competition fails. Bombardier gets financial assistance, SNC-Lavalin gets legal assistance, Loblaws gets refrigerator assistance. That doesn't help competition, and CBC gets billions in assistance as well, and they pay out certain media with hundreds of millions of dollars.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
This is one of those questions that I'm going to virtually agree entirely with Neil on. It's something that I actually worked on when I was in government as the Parliamentary Secretary to Industry, working with Maxime Bernier, ironically enough, was on red tape reduction. And it's something that we take very seriously. In fact, our party is even going further than we did when we were in government. We're saying 2-for-1 rule on red tape. We're actually going to reduce red tape across the board. What we've seen from the Liberals is an increase in the thousands on regulations, and that's just not sustainable for business. One of the things that I'm really proud of in opposition is that in the last couple of years, as Bill Morneau, as finance minister, talked about potentially floated idea after idea of raising taxes on, business benefits that employees get and those kind of things, different things that would significantly impact small businesses. We as an opposition party stopped those things from moving ahead.
Thank you. I should mention that the first few questions that we asked this evening were submitted online to the Chamber portal. Now we have a few questions that are coming from the floor. How are you planning to ensure a balanced budget without decreasing our service standard? How many years will this take, I'm assuming, to get to a balanced budget? And how many years will it take to pay off our, it says deficit, but I'm thinking that it should be debt. And I'm going to go with Mr. Dole first.
We have a strong commitment for 2 years in balancing the budget. That's ending the deficit. How can we do this without harming services? If we cut taxes, healthcare is one of the ways that we're getting the federal government out of healthcare. We'll cut federal taxes, let the provinces raise that money locally within the provinces, so they have that room. Mike corrected me earlier. I do specifically mean we stop taking it federally, and to avoid harming frontline services. Just in two specific areas of corporate welfare and foreign spending, we spend up to $20 billion. Some estimates more, some are around the $14 billion mark. So just by those two projects, those two categories, we can end most of our deficit.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
This is definitely an area where Neil and I differ in our policies, and our parties differ in our policies. Neil just said he would cut healthcare transfers. That is not the position of the Federal Conservative Party. We've said that we would get our budget balanced in 5 years. That's a reasonable time frame given the circumstances that we're in right now. We have the experience to get that done. In fact, I sat on the Cabinet Committee from 2012 to 2015 that took a look at, had every department come in, every minister come in and present their plans to reduce their spending and get the budgets under control. As we moved from that global meltdown in 2010 back towards a balanced budget that we promised by 2015 and delivered. So our platform is going to be costed completely by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, and when people look at that platform, they'll be able to see that we have a reasonable plan to deliver on our promises and at the same time have a balanced budget within the 5-year time frame that we lay out.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
I'm a fiscal conservative. It might be shocking to you folks, but owning small businesses, running our household, very, very important to make sure you spend what you have. But I also feel that deficit is not a dirty word. Because if we have services, if we have infrastructure spending, and right now it is the time to spend on infrastructure for roads and bridges, the interest rates are relatively low. So when are you going to do it? You're not going to do it when it's high. Now, on the other side, we got to be productive in everything that we do. The GDP looks pretty darn good for Canada for the last few years. Unemployment is at its lowest for many years. As long as everybody in this country contribute to our economy, we're going to do fine. And the deficit...
Thank you. Next question, diversity. What will your party do for people who are marginalized, for example, people who are living in poverty, emancipated youth, Indigenous, and homeless people? I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
Yeah, one of the first things, well, I guess first off, I'll just reference the last statement I made, which, our population is aging right now. There are more vulnerable Canadians, and this is exactly the wrong time to be proposing cuts to healthcare spending. One of the first things that we did do that I think will address some of the issues that are being asked about is a universal tax cut. And that universal tax cut is at the lowest tax bracket, so it has an impact for every Canadian, but it's going to have a proportionally bigger impact for the most vulnerable Canadians. And those of you that know me well know that if anything, I'm a champion for the most vulnerable, and think that where governments ought to be investing is in helping people who cannot help themselves. And when we've got balanced budgets, I'll take issue with my friend Richard here. When we've got balanced budgets, it gives us the flexibility to make the best decisions we can to help the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you. Mr. Wong.
I think most folks know that the Liberal Party stands up for the people that are distressed, that are disadvantaged. I think we are the flag bearers of the social responsibility we have for the poor, the homeless. But that being said, we must look at other avenues to help them. And when, at my earlier statement, initial statement, education is a must. We have to make sure those folks stay in the education system and do the best they can, because without it, it's going to be a complete cycle of assisting them that they should not do.
Mr. Dole.
I think I should correct in case I misspoke earlier. I'm not sure. I thought I fixed it in my last statement, but the People's Party of Canada is not cutting healthcare services. We are cutting our taxes federally so that provinces have that same space to raise locally. If we cut the GST, it's about $40 billion that the federal government brings in. That's about the same as healthcare spending. So sending it back to the provinces doesn't cut provinces. We still have some transfer payments that would be available to smooth over edges. So why send the money to the federal government? Why send it to Ottawa to then send it back to provinces? That there's a bureaucracy involved there and a waste that doesn't need to be there and doesn't allow control. I do agree with Mr. Lake on tax cuts. Our party has a strong tax cut plan. The first $15,000 is zero tax. And then $15,000 to $100,000 is lowered to or changed to 15% flat tax in that range.
Thank you. Next question falls under, it's coming from the audience, falls under three categories: agriculture, transport, and international trades. Whoever wrote this question, well done. What will your party do to improve the rail system in Canada? Farmers are losing millions of dollars a year for their crops sitting on train cars and go bad before they get to port. And I'm going to start off with Mr. Wong.
I guess the easiest solution is, rather than using rail to transport oil, that we should use rail to transport our food products. So hopefully that will come soon with the TMX pipeline. But trade is so important, and I don't know whether our government, provincially or federally, have exploited that idea. There are billions of people in China, in Japan, in Asia, in India, that like our product. We have fantastic food products here. So we need to really do a better job of promoting ourselves. We have to send people in those countries to see what type of food they enjoy and eat. And we haven't exploited that. So we need to do a much better job, and I plan to do that if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dole.
Getting pipelines built is definitely a priority to clear up some space on the rail. Also allowing farmers and small business and local communities, local farming communities, to control their local shortline rails, to be able to keep those running and to not be controlled by larger rail companies that are dismantling the short lines and going for strictly the most efficient high volume and causing farmers to drive 50 miles to unload their grains. If we allow those farmers and entrepreneurs to build short line and have control to keep their loading drive shorter, that saves them a lot of money on fuel and time, and they can load their grains locally, get them on a short rail, which takes it to the bigger funnels, and that's an important area for our farmers.
Thank you, Mr. Lake.
Yeah, Mr. Wong quotes, I think, the Liberal motto, which is in regards to pipelines, hoping that'll come soon. It takes more than hoping that the pipeline will come soon. I'm going to quote a Democrat here. JFK one time said, "Things do not happen, things are made to happen." It's the federal government's responsibility to have made that pipeline happen, or at least allowed that pipeline to happen. We had a private sector proponent, who was prepared to build that pipeline. The pipeline was approved, and yet the government got itself into a situation where it had to pay $4.5 billion for a pipeline that was approved by the private sector, instead of just showing the will to get it done. And I do agree with Mr. Wong on the front that it's because oil is being shipped by rail that is a big part of the reason that we can't ship other things by rail, because that capacity is being used for something that should be shipped through pipelines.
Thank you. Next question. Equalization has been unfair to Alberta for years. What is your party's plan to ensure the formula becomes more fair to all provinces? I'll start off with Mr. Dole.
Fixing the equalization formula is one of our main platforms as well. We've been talking about that for a while, as soon as the party started up. And it's, even though our leader is from Quebec, he is a strong proponent for getting them off this welfare system, which should just be an aid to smooth out edges and to help people meet needs. But it's become, if somebody's on this program for 50 years, that's not helping them, that's hindering them. It's not having the right incentives to build their economies. Why increase your economy if it directly cuts your free money you're getting? So we would change the formula. We would lower the total amount of payments, and we would change the formula, make sure hydro is included at full value, just like our energy is in Alberta, and those measures would help lower our equalization being sent out and not returning.
Thank you, Mr. Lake.
Yeah, I think that the country needs to be able to have a conversation about equalization, and one of the things that I think is probably among the most cynical situations that I've seen in a government, 4 years of cynical situation after cynical situation, was them hiding the approval or reapproval of the equalization formula in an omnibus bill, a budget bill that was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages long in coded language, so that it was done without any consultation with the Canadian public and no conversation. And Albertans are rightfully frustrated right now that you've got a situation where we have this equalization formula and transfers and revenue and wealth that's generated through our resource sector in Alberta, and yet when it comes time to get those resources to market, we don't see the same enthusiasm for working together from the other provinces.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
I have a very short answer for equalization payments, and nothing's going to get done. We're spinning our wheels. Nobody's going to do anything about it. It's been with us for the last 50 years, so I can't think of anything that's going to come out of it, unfortunately.
Okay, next question is under the category of oil and gas. What is your party's position for making sure that Canada's energy resources are sold on the global market to countries outside of the United States that provide maximum benefit and at the same time ensuring that environmental concerns are protected and handled responsibly? I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
I feel like we're kind of answering the same question over and over again here, but it's probably the right question to be coming up time and time again, because this is what we're hearing at the doors over and over again. And I just come back to the fact that if you take a look at our global approach to the environment and the need to take action on the environment, right now, if you look at the top 10 exporting countries of oil around the world, Canada is, I think, number 4 right now. The Americans just broke into the top 10. Before that, they were serving mostly their own economy. And other than that, the countries that are exporting oil are Russia, Iran, Iraq. I think Kazakhstan's number 11 now. You've got Algeria, Nigeria, Angola. If we don't find a way to export our oil to foreign markets, that oil, the markets are just going to be consumed by these other economies. And do we think for a second that those countries are taking meaningful action on the environment?
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
We need to stress that we have to develop our resources. Again, I say it's to make sure it's safely and environmentally friendly. We have to do it, but we need to find markets other than the U.S. because the U.S. are buying us dirt cheap, and they're making money by shipping oil that we sent to them to foreign countries. And I find that's utterly absurd. And you and I know that these big corporations, the Koch brothers down in the States especially, being one of them, have us by the short hair. Sorry for the vulgarity, but that's the way it is. So we need to find other sources, and the Asian market is the goal that we have to do. We have to send more of our energy to the Asian market.
Mr. Dole?
I think I've said it a few times, but we'll all remember Section 92-10 of the Constitution and its authority that if the federal government can state that something's for the general advantage of the country and take jurisdiction over it and make sure pipelines get built to the coasts and we can get fair market value for our oil and gas and our other commodities, and if we're shipping like Richard said, to Asia, that's a big market, and we need to make sure we're fostering that. And for making sure we have good environmental standards, we consult with people. We've been consulting on these pipelines for, it seems like, forever, and they should have been built a long time ago. They should have been built privately, and we have hundreds of recommendations that have come forward. We can follow those recommendations. We just need a government that'll stand up and make sure it happens and not be held up by small groups.
Thank you. Next question is under municipal issues. Municipalities depend on stable federal funding for infrastructure through the gas tax. With this funding set to expire in a couple of years, can you promise us tonight to maintain stable, predictable funding to municipalities, for example, through the gas tax? And we're going to start off with Mr. Wong.
My short answer again is yes, I back it 100%.
Okay, Mr. Dole.
It's our priority to make sure that federal jurisdiction is taken care of, and but the underlying of the federal government spending money locally should be limited to what is federal jurisdiction. I don't want to overstep bounds of provincial jurisdiction and what should be built, and people should be able to innovate locally and get investment locally. And some projects are quite large and need external help to get built, but that can be done by investment. It can be done by P3s to get private investment with public assistance to know that something's going to happen. And that can happen more provincially than federally in a lot of instances. And anytime we can move power more locally and funds more privately, we support that.
Mr. Lake?
Well, when we were in government and Maxime Bernier was my colleague, we did double the gas tax and we made it permanent, the transfer to municipalities, because municipalities need that certainty in regards to the funding for the infrastructure that's vital to our communities. I mean, sewage infrastructure and roads and the different things that gas tax helps to fund. I think it's important that when governments promise infrastructure spending, I think this is something that we've said in terms of this election campaign. One of the things that you're going to see is going to be a theme from us is when we promise something, we're actually going to promise things we can deliver, and then in government we're going to deliver them. Unlike the Liberals, who made several promises that they didn't deliver, and on infrastructure spending, vast sums of monies were promised by the Liberals, but very little of it was actually delivered when the time came. And yet we're still spending over $60 billion more than we were spending just 4 years ago.
Thank you. Next question is under the category of international affairs. What will your party do to facilitate the release of our citizens in China who are being unlawfully detained? I'm going to start off with Mr. Dole.
That was one of those random questions, I guess, that I mentioned in my intro. It's an important one. There's a lot of possibilities that came into why those two people are being held in China right now. Getting played by the Americans is one of them. We need to make sure we have a strong leader, not someone who's just singing and dancing, and they need to see what's coming and the effects of what's going to be done. But you need to stand up strongly, and we should stand up for our values, and we shouldn't be pushed around anyway. We should be speaking out and condemning that in the forums that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
Listen, our Prime Minister needs to show some leadership here. Prior to the last election, everybody remembers the video that was circulated. Prime Minister's relationship with China goes way back, and of course, when he was asked to name one of his most admired countries, he came up with China because their basic dictatorship allows them to do things that other countries can't do. An interesting answer, and now we see that he absolutely doesn't have the courage or the capacity to deal with difficult issues like this. And it just shows, when dealing with a difficult circumstance with his cabinet, he solved that challenge by moving a particular cabinet minister, John McCallum, into the position of ambassador to China. And then, of course, we saw what happened with that. This was not a strong cabinet minister, and he was not a strong ambassador to China, and he had to resign. We need a prime minister who will take decisive action in situations like this.
Mr. Wong?
I have a nephew who's in Hong Kong right now. He's about 35 years old, just had a couple of young children. I believe they're 2 and 3 years old. And they're out there demonstrating with their kids. And I find that just absolutely amazing. And fortunately, as far as I know, there's no deaths has occurred in this protest, and it's been lasting for quite a few months. Now, Canada is in a position, we're in between a rock and a hard place, as the saying goes. You have the U.S. and you have the China, and then you have this Huawei company with this CFO. The only thing I can do is the 300,000 Chinese in Hong Kong. If we can get their support, we can do some changes.
Okay, the next question Again, from the audience, Leduc County has claimed a state of emergency last week is just one example of the hardships that our farmers are facing. What support would your party offer in cases such as these to the agriculture community? I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
Well, I think that when we were in government, we had situations like this from time to time, and generally when these circumstances arose, there was consensus. These were times that government and opposition parties came together and came together in agreement on things like this. Things are tough. The weather this year has been really, really difficult here. I think that it's difficult for me to point to specifics, and I don't want to. One of the things I've learned in my time as a member of parliament is sometimes the answer is I don't know. I don't know specifically what our government would do in exactly this circumstance. We'd need to be in government at the time and having conversations with our officials on the remedies that were available. But know that this is exactly the job of a member of parliament, is to stand up in difficult times and work to find solutions.
Mr. Wong?
Farmers, when the times are good, fantastic. When they encounter problems, we sympathize. I sympathize with them. But being a true free enterpriser, they just have to stick it out. And if they do need help, the federal government should be there to help them. But I think most farmers, I would believe, want to get out of the situations themselves, be independent, and I admire that completely. So sometimes we ask the government to do too much, and I think as a free enterpriser, you just have to stick it out. I've stuck it out. A lot of people who are in dire strait have stuck it out. So just don't count on government all the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
Sticking it out is a strong free market philosophy. It's important, but let's make sure we have plans and procedures and systems in place that can help these farmers. They can buy insurance, make sure there's help and good regulations for insurance. But what, like Mike says, depends on the specific situations. But one key for helping people out in emergencies, which we help out here, we help out around the world when terrible natural disasters happen or other sorts of disasters. The key for that is to making sure we have the money to pay for it when it comes up for these emergencies. So let's balance the budget, pay down the debt, not have overbloated big government that is worried about too many things, so we can be prepared when something like that happens, and then we have the money to invest and assist where needed.
Thank you. Next question. What does the duty to consult First Nations mean to you? Do you think we should risk not having real consent from First Nations if the project benefits the common good? And I'm going to start off with Mr. Wong.
I don't know if any of you folks have seen my shirt, Orange Shirt Day, right? And I think most of you folks know about Orange Shirt Day. But, excuse me, certainly the Liberal Party have done a lot for the Indigenous community, and we're still going to continue doing it. When I knock on doors in a lot of the communities, some feel that we're doing too much or spending too much time on that issue. And I can sympathize with that, because it's been a long and tedious, and it's a long journey. And but we have to get it done right. We owe it to the Indigenous community. So I really support Mr. Trudeau and his effort in doing this, and let's get it right. It's due. The time is due. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
The First Nations, there's a long history there that needs to be discussed, and it involves legalities and culture and the history. And I don't know if we're going to solve that up on the stage with 45 seconds left. But the important part of consent is having that consultation, but also coming to an agreement and knowing that there's an agreement at the end and that someone has final say. Who has the final say could be a legal matter. I would like to see a situation where things are, and then the community the communication is improved between the First Nations community and the federal government and the governments at different levels. We can, our party would look at the Indian Act itself and improve the relationships, and that's going to be key, and there's a lot to discuss in there.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
Yeah, one thing that I think is clear to me after 13 years in this job and just reflecting on decades and decades, centuries really of relations with Indigenous communities is that we have failed at consultation for all of this time. I mean, time and time again, we've done consultation wrong. And I think we've learned a lot as over the last, probably over the last decade particularly, we've learned a lot about the way that we do that. I think that, to Neil's point, we do have to have a process that makes sense, that everybody understands, that's got a time limit to it. But we also have to take an approach that everybody benefits. We have to find common ground and work harder to find common ground, and I don't think that we've worked hard enough in that direction over several decades, and I think it's something that we're all coming around to now, a little late, I'd say.
Thank you. Next question. In the midst of an economic downturn, the federal government announced they would implement a carbon tax. Can you explain your party's stance on the carbon tax and climate change? Mr. Dole.
We have a pretty clear stance on the carbon tax. We would end it. There would be no carbon tax. We also, unlike the Conservative Party climate change plan, which has the most pages and the most bullet points, we wouldn't move that carbon tax and just turn it into a carbon pricing that goes on businesses and then subsidize that. If they can make some products, we'll subsidize that with some taxpayer money. Well, we won't. That's the Conservative plan. We just end carbon pricing. We won't move it to the back end of businesses. We won't subsidize those businesses for their research and development. They'll do their R&D and they'll get the benefits from that. And we certainly wouldn't subsidize them transferring it globally so that they can use tax credits or carbon credits globally to count towards some Paris Agreement targets that they say they're going to meet. They can't do it locally, so they're going to do it globally by transferring our taxpayer dollars out and building projects in other countries.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
Well, our party's been very clear that we're going to end the carbon tax. Clearly, we're in a little bit of a differentiation, I think, with the Neil's party in our view to climate change. Our party is taking a serious approach to climate change. I'm the shadow minister for youth, or was before the election campaign started, and the number one issue that among youth that I talk to from universities across the country, including right here in Alberta, is their concern for the environment. It's the number one thing that would stop them from voting Conservative, is if they don't believe that the Conservatives have a plan for the environment. And so we do have a comprehensive plan. I'm proud of that plan. That plan focuses on technology. It focuses on a global approach. It focuses on taking Canadian expertise and sharing it with the world to the benefit of the Canadian economy, rather than just imposing a carbon tax on Canadians that will have zero impact on global emissions.
Mr. Wong?
As I said before in my previous statement, the carbon tax is the way to go. If you look at our neighbor, British Columbia, they've had the carbon tax for several years now, and look at their economy. It's one of the best in Canada. Carbon tax, again, changes behaviors and habits of us using carbon-based fuel. And you are going to get, or the personal compensation, you're going to get 90% of that tax back to you. Small business will get rebates back to their businesses. Small business in the green technology is being taxed half at the business rate. So there's lots of incentive to have this carbon tax remain. It will be better for all of Canada.
Thank you. I'm going to take moderator's privilege here and ask my own question. At the latest Canadian Chamber AGM that just finished in St. John, the Canadian Chamber passed a motion to ask the federal government to revoke their mortgage stress test For anybody in the audience that doesn't know, the mortgage stress test meant that you had to qualify at the going rate plus the going rate plus 2%. Even if you were renewing a mortgage, what would be your position on revoking the mortgage stress test? And I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
Well, our party came out with a 4-point policy on real estate in general and housing in general, where we said that we would revoke the stress test for first-time buyers and those renewing mortgages. We also said that we would move to a 30-year amortization for some home buyers. I mean, let's face it, the tests that were put in place, the measures that were put in place to deal with situations in Vancouver and Toronto that are not the same situations here in Edmonton. I don't know about you in the room, but if you're in the same boat I am, you're taking a look at the house that you've owned for the last decade, the house that I'm in, purchased in 2007, and it's pretty much worth the same as it was in 2007, regardless of money that's been put in. So we're not dealing with an overheated housing market here in Alberta, and our party is squarely focused on making life more affordable for Canadians.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
I don't know the subject too well, unfortunately. Sorry, my apologies. But my way of thinking on these mortgage stress tests, when I worked at Sears, and then after a couple of years, I wanted to buy a house for my family, I looked at it on an individual basis. Can I afford it? And these days, I think some people are just way too ambitious trying to get into the homes that they can't afford. I see many houses that are empty when I door knock, and what are they doing? They're not using it, or are they renting it, or haven't found renters? So it's a personal thing. I don't think housing is for everybody, and I believe a lot of young people, millennials, would rather rent than own a house, personally anyway.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
I don't think the federal government or government should be highly involved in stress tests and dictating how people are purchasing their houses and what the banks are doing and lending money. If a bank wants to lend money to someone that can't afford it, that's a bad idea for the bank. We just got to make sure we don't bail them out if they do it to $1 trillion worth of real estate. So if we get the government out and let the banks choose who they are lending to, the other part of that is the affordability of housing, and the worst cases for affordability right now are in Toronto and Vancouver, who receive 41% of our immigration. So having a flow of people to these major centers is having a hard effect on the affordability, and they're coming in and rising these house prices beyond what local people can afford.
Thank you. Small business is a cornerstone of every strong economy. 95% of businesses in this country are small businesses. What's your plan to promote and encourage small business in Edmonton-Wetaskiwin? I'm going to start off with Mr. Wong.
I don't know your town that well, but I noticed that driving in, went to this donaire shop on Main Street, wonderful little shop, and I asked them how well they're doing, and they said, I've been here 17 years. Wonderful donaire, just had it before I came here. So these entrepreneurs know what they're doing. I'm sure they research the market, what kind of business needs to be successful, and let these people do what they do best. Let them search out the business they want to establish, and let's support them. These small businesses, non-big chain businesses, each individual should support them, and wholeheartedly.
Mr. Dole?
I don't think my policy is specific for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin. I think it helps the whole country, which helps back here. If we lower taxes, we lower income taxes, we lower corporate taxes, we end capital gains taxes, that's more money in everyone's pocket. When people have more money to spend locally, they spend it. It improves other businesses, the small businesses locally benefit from that, and that's how we would support the small businesses in Edmonton-Wetaskiwin by helping everyone in all locations, nothing specific.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
Yeah, my answer is going to be pretty similar to that. Actually, when we were in government for the 10 years that we were in government from, 9 years, 2006 to 2015, we lowered virtually every tax that you could possibly pay, including corporate taxes, including income taxes. And it had a terrific effect. Specific to Edmonton-Wetaskiwin is our approach on pipelines, which we've talked about. But if we don't solve that, that's going to have very serious ramifications in the long-term economy of our region, and we have to solve that. And then finally, again, more broadly based, is the approach on red tape. We have to get government out of the way of people starting businesses. There are common sense regulations that need to be followed, but we've got way too much duplication. Governments never take away regulations. They only add regulations. No one ever gets around to making it simpler, and we've got to do a better job at that.
Thank you. Next question. What is your party's vision for uniting the East Coast refining opportunities to keep oil processing in Canada and leveraging the resources we have in Canada so our revenues are staying within Canada regarding oil and gas? I'm going to start off with Mr. Dole.
Section 9210 of the Constitution. I think that pretty much sums it up. We'll make sure that we get pipelines built, and we'll find private investors to build it and get the regulation out of the way so that they want to come build it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lake?
The other day, Andrew announced a plan for a national energy corridor. He did talk about it in one of his My Vision for Canada speeches as well. And I think that this is really important. It sort of puts in place a common sense system for building energy or projects, regardless of what they might be. Once you've pre-approved a corridor, then you can build any project within that corridor. You've already got the land set aside. You've already crossed a lot of the regulatory hurdles. And I just think that that makes a lot of sense in terms of our ability to build something either east or west in this country. Something, again, that's going to have benefit for many provinces. It's not just Alberta's energy that will benefit from that, or Alberta's oil and gas. It's electricity produced in Quebec that can be transferred across provincial boundaries as well.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
I think the market of supply and demand is the ultimate way how business react. If big business, if U.S. corporations, oil companies do not want to invest in our country and purchase our product, they won't come, regardless of what we try to do. So it's very dependent on the world pricing of oil. How we can rectify that is by not always concentrating on the oil and gas business. Unfortunately, it's a big business for us, I know, but we have to diversify our economy. And previous governments, and they're mostly conservative governments in Alberta, have not seen the future, have not envisioned what this province could do. And that is the state of affairs that we are here now, because they didn't have any foresight.
Next question. If your party pushes for a policy that harms our region and province, will you stand up for your constituents or your party? And I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
First of all, I can't foresee that would actually happen, but of course I would stand up for my constituents. I mean, the person that went before me in the riding that I represented before the boundaries were changed was David Kilgore. David in the early 90s voted against the GST in a budget, got kicked out of his party, and was elected as a Liberal in Alberta for 4 straight elections because of that. A good example of some, and then he wound up leaving the Liberal Party at the end over another issue, but a good example. I mean, my job is first and foremost to represent my constituents, and would have no hesitation whatsoever doing that.
Mr. Wong?
My constituents comes first.
Mr. Dole?
Yeah, I think it sums it up. The local constituencies are in charge. I would go and fight for the policies that we've been promoting and that you can see on our websites. And I'm going to fight for those policies, which I think help everyone, and including our district. So to go against those, if there was an instance where the policy came up specifically, absolutely, I would support the constituency.
Thank you. Next question is on seniors, which is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, because as most of you know, I still have another 10 years to go till I become a senior. Tough crowd. What will you do for seniors? And I'm going to start off with Mr. Wong.
I don't know if the audience know that just this year, the Liberal government has established a ministry for seniors. The minister that is occupying that ministerial position right now, her name is Philomena Tassi. I met her several months ago, and it's our Liberal folks from Strathcona who initiate this process under the guise of the Seniors Liberal Commission. So I'm happy that we do have a seniors ministry, so we're going to look after you folks. The seniors has contributed, again, so much to our society. We have to respect their worth, and we're going to take care of them, whether it's by increasing...
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
The problem here is, how do we fix a situation that was caused by successive previous governments? The seniors have been promised things. There were deals made, contracts, situations. People are counting on the federal government. And while in a longer timeline, we want to help people be more self-sustained, there's people in the senior community that have counted on the government to fulfill those needs, and they expected that to be there, and they have to be there. So if we can lower our deficits, and we can take care of our federal jurisdiction, which includes taking care of seniors, and make sure health care is taken account locally properly for the right demographics in the areas, we can help the seniors, and we do need to ensure that the federal government takes care of its responsibilities that it's promised people in all sorts of areas.
Mr. Lake?
Well, Richard, I hope to have the opportunity after the election to have you come visit Ottawa, and I can introduce you to Alice Wong, who was our Minister for Seniors when we were in government as a Conservative Party. So this is not an initiative put in place by the Liberals recently. There's been several measures that we put in place that affect seniors. Right off the bat, the universal tax credit disproportionately helps seniors relative to others. The carbon tax, I mean, many seniors are on fixed incomes, and getting rid of the carbon tax will have a significant impact. And then just recently we announced an increase to the age credit, which is specifically for seniors and specifically targeted towards the most vulnerable seniors. So we can put in place meaningful measures for seniors. I would say this, that a government that's running $20 billion deficits year in and year out has less flexibility to help people like seniors and other vulnerable Canadians than governments that run balanced budgets.
Hey, thank you. Next question. How will you support families in Alberta in terms of affordable child care? I'm going to start off with Mr. Dole.
We would lower taxes, specifically for child care. That should be a provincial jurisdiction, and we would respect provincial jurisdictions. Currently, Alberta, with its transfer payments and equalization payments, we send, and Quebec getting $13 billion a year, for instance, and they have $7 a day daycare. That isn't Alberta's responsibility to take care of. But we do want to make sure that individuals and families have the resources. So they need jobs, they need the pipeline built, we need to diversify the economy through entrepreneurship and lowering taxes and lowering corporate taxes and ending capital gains taxes, and giving more money to people locally so that they can choose what priorities there are. Not everyone wants or needs childcare, and unless they have to go work and they...
Thank you, Mr. Lake.
Our government, one of the first things we did when we got elected in 2006 was introduce the universal child care benefit. It was one of the 5 pillars of that 2006 campaign. When the Liberals came to power, they morphed it into, I think, I don't even know what they call it, the Canada Child Benefit, I think is what it's called now. We've said that we will keep that in place, and on top of that, reduce taxes for families in virtually every way that we can. So again, the income tax cut, but we also announced that we're going to bring back the tax credit for sports, the children's fitness tax credit, that we're going to bring back the arts and learning tax credit as well. So very, very significant tax savings for families that will allow them to spend the money on whatever their priorities are.
Mr. Wong?
I think anybody that's in the audience that have children and earning approximately, I believe, $35,000 per annum is getting an increase of about $600 or so in this Canada Child's Tax Credit. So I think they used to call it the family allowance when I was very, very young. I think my parents was telling me about that. So this is a similar thing that we support families. So it's going to continue, and we're going to make sure it meets the rate of inflation. And sorry, thank you. That's all I have to say about it.
Thank you. Next question. Is your party going to try and hit the Paris climate targets? If so, how can your party hit these aggressive targets without destroying our economy, given that UN experts say we would need a carbon tax of $300 per ton to reach them, a 1,500% increase? I'm going to start off with Mr. Lake.
Yeah, I mean, virtually every credible economic expert has said that there's no way that the plan that we have in place can possibly meet the Paris Agreement targets. And you referenced, of course, the fact that the carbon tax would have to be increased to completely unsustainable amounts for us to even have a shot at it if that was the approach that we're taking. But virtually even the staunchest advocates for climate change action have said there's no way this government's going to meet their targets. We think that our plan, focused on green technology, focused on exporting Canadian expertise around the world, focused on a global approach to climate change, not focused on a punitive carbon tax that does nothing to decrease emissions, is our best shot at reaching the Paris Agreement targets. Mr. Wong?
When the Conservative Party and a lot of their members do not think our climate is affected by man-made pollution, they're deniers. I find that just incredible, Eminent scientists and economists states that it is a real situation. Some people call it an emergency. I may not call it an emergency, but it is a serious matter. So the carbon tax is the way to go. And again, you're going to get the rebates and you're going to get the tax credits back. So it's going to be a zero-sum thing. And like I said again, BC has done extremely well with their carbon tax, and we should follow suit. Absolutely, this province should follow suit.
Mr. Dole?
The Conservative Party signed on to the Paris Agreement targets. Mr. Lake says the carbon tax isn't the way to do it. The $300 a ton would be needed to tax, but they still have a plan that wants to hit those targets. So they need to move those costs somewhere else, and they've decided to move them to the back end and make sure businesses are doing R&D and hitting the carbon goals to hit the target and subsidizing it. So it's still a $300 cost that they're saying is going to be needed to hit those. Whereas we say innovation is the way to go. Private innovation, we don't need to be involved in that. It's just a matter of time when private industries find solutions for the emissions. And what we need now is an honest debate, not people being silenced over opinions and new ideas.
Thank you. How many veterans are in your party, and what will you do for our veterans? I'm going to start off with Mr. Wong.
The question was how many?
How many veterans are in your party, and what will you do for our veterans?
I don't have an answer for that. I'm sorry. Veterans are very important. There was a minister, I believe, from our former Attorney General that was offered that position, and she had declined it, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But the veterans are very, very important. Unfortunately, I do not know too many veterans. If I'm more knowledgeable on this matter, I would speak certainly more about it. But they are dear to my heart. I watched them.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
Was that Jody Wilson-Raybould that you were referring to? That decline, Jody Wilson-Raybould that declined that veterans? Interesting. I don't know how many veterans we have in our party. I'm sure it's a large percentage. We hear about them a lot. We had veterans write our veterans policy for us. We had an event in Gatineau, and we had 44 veterans come on stage that were involved in that. A lot of candidates are veterans, and as well as Electoral District Association executives that are veterans that help craft that policy. And the policy is specifically to make it fair for veterans. Right now it's in different stages, pre-2006 and after 2006, and then some people got a lump sum, and now what do they do without a lifetime disability benefits? And so our policy is to return that back. The lump sums will be counted as lump sum payments as advances on that continuing pension to assist and give a lifetime pension for veterans.
Thank you. Mr. Lake?
Well, first off, I mean, I think I don't really know how many veterans specifically are actually in my party right now. Out of 338 candidates, I don't know all of the candidates that we have. I do know that we have an incredible voice in Aaron O'Toole, and of course in the Edmonton area we had Laurie Hahn here for all of the time that we were in government, and was a huge champion for veterans. Aaron O'Toole, of course, was a minister in our cabinet. What we've said time and time again is, first of all, we shouldn't be taking veterans to court. In the last election campaign, Trudeau promised that the Liberal Party would no longer take veterans to court to get the services that they deserve, and then promptly said that they were asking for more than they could give. We've got to put an end to that. If we're going to prioritize anything, if we're going to prioritize anybody in our society, it should be those people who have put their lives on the line to protect us and fight for what we have in this country.
Thank you. Okay, next question. How will you work with members of other political parties on regional as well as national issues? And I'm going to start off with Mr. Dole.
Yeah, there needs to be consensus. It helps when parties can work together, and reaching across the aisle can come up with better solutions. It's important to have an honest debate, be able to speak openly, not being shouted down for having opinions, and that is something we would be open for. We appreciate open debate and freedom of expression, and that's how we will find solutions, and that's how we would reach across the aisle.
Mr. Lake?
Well, that's a tricky question, because the answer is I love to work with people from all parties to try and make life better for Canadians. The reality is, unfortunately, in our political system, this is my first experience in opposition. I was in government for 9 years. This last 4 years has been incredibly disheartening, quite honestly, because as I have made that effort to work with members across the way in the Liberal Party particularly, when I thought I was making headway, when things were said to me that seemed to be pointed in the right direction, time and time again, in the end, the decision went the other way, and the concerns I brought forward were completely ignored. So, I hope that after this election we'll form government, And I hope that when we form government, I'll remember what it was like to be in opposition and treat my opposition colleagues with more respect than they treated us.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
My proposal is for those who don't know about Chinese dim sum, maybe you do, but I will invite my opposition friends to come and have dim sum with me. It's a round table. There's different food on it. You pick and choose. And similarly with ideas, pick and choose the ideas that you think would help Canada, all of Canadians. And I would encourage politicians to do that. Sit down, breakfast, dim sum, whatever, and talk things out. There's commonality. I'm sure there's commonality, and that's the only way that we can build a better country is by speaking with each other. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a supplementary follow-up to your question. Does that invitation to dim sum extend to the moderator? Careful how you answer.
Only if you enjoy the chicken feet.
No, go away. I'm not a picky eater, as most of you can tell, but I know. Okay, so next question. With all these election promises, how much debt is too much debt? It seems we are not gaining any traction year after year. What is your party's plan to reduce the deficit? And I'm going to start with Mr. Lake.
Well, I mean, I think we've got to spend less. I mean, ultimately, we've got to freeze spending. We have to spend less. We're spending, we went from just under $300 billion to over $350 billion in 4 years per year. That's insane. Like, that is not sustainable. And one thing I learned when I was in government is it's way harder to unwind new spending than it is not to spend the money in the first place. And so we have to watch our spending. Secondly, we can't be robbing ourselves of revenues that we need as a government to have a healthier economy. And so in the context of spending over $60 billion more or $55 billion more than what we were spending before, we've also robbed ourselves of revenues that we need by not being able to further our economic interests by building pipelines in this country. And so those would be initial steps.
Thank you. Mr. Wong?
Cutting the government fat is important, and making it much more efficient is, again, important. Treat it like if it was your own business, a private enterprise, and you'll find that the deficit will come down. That being said, us Canadians are hardworking Canadians. We're smart. We've got the resources. Let's build on that. Let's create more jobs, create more added value to our products, and we'll be okay. We'll be okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
Mr. Lake has mentioned spending less. Watching the spending promises coming out of his proposed government is at least $20 billion on top of what the Liberals have already spent, so I'm not sure where that savings is coming from, or that spending less is coming from. Our policy is pretty clear. We have about close to $20 billion in cuts, and I don't know if you've noticed a lot of spending promises from our party or from our leader or from our candidates, because there aren't any out there, because ending the deficit in 2 years is one of our main platform policies and our promises to people, because that's money that can be used later. It's not our money to spend when we're getting close to $700 billion in debt federally, plus all the billions in provincial and municipal debt. Those are our grandkids that are going to have to pay that back eventually if we ever get out of deficits, and our party is promising to do that in 2 years.
I'm sorry, candidates, I lost track of who's answered this question. Can you help me out here?
I answered it.
You answered it? Okay, Mr. Lake?
I'll take another crack.
No, you already answered it? No, it's fair, moderator. Yeah, but I won't give you another minute. Okay, next question. What will your party do to secure the borders of Canada and protect the people from illegal immigration and threats to national security, causing economic burdens on Canadians? I'm going to start with Mr. Wong.
Yeah, the issue of these illegal border crossing, it's such a heartfelt matter. You know, we have people coming in, they're fleeing for their lives. And I think Canadians are, generally speaking, quite compassionate. But we have to have it so legal immigration at the proper areas is the way to go. But when they're at the border and they're crying out for help, I think us Canadians have to help them. And the amounts I understand have decreased substantially over the last year or so. So I don't think it's become an issue, other than that we see it on television, and then people do get upset. But I don't think it's an issue now.
Thank you. Mr. Dole?
The key is definitely not inviting people to walk across the border at non-ports of entry with a welcome sign. Hanging the welcome sign on the illegal entry just doesn't make sense. But the key now, we're in this situation. There's been a lot of people coming across the border. It's a big expense. You can put up fencing at high traffic areas, but make sure that it's known that people come across, if they're fleeing such devastating areas as New York State, that they're just going to be sent back.
Mr. Lake?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with Neil on that. You know, this idea that someone coming from New York State or Minnesota into Canada, because they happen to go around a regular border crossing instead of going through the regular border crossing, that somehow they're treated differently, is just not common sense policy. And what's happening is that these people are prioritized over, you know, Yazidi women who have been sold into sexual slavery in northern Iraq and seen their husbands brutally murdered in front of them, or you know, families in Myanmar who've seen family members burned to death. You know, it's absolutely not an orderly, fair system. I'm just going to use my last 17 seconds here just to, you know, I want to correct Neil on the last question because I didn't get my second shot at it. Tax cuts are not spending increases. So when you count a tax cut for seniors and roll it in as a spending increase, that's not entirely accurate or fair.
Thank you. Well, as they say in the House of Commons, time for question period has expired, and I would dare say we got much better answers today than we get from any stripe of government that's sitting in government during question period. So please join me in thanking the candidates. Just as an interesting point, I think we planned to cover 12 questions. With your cooperation and the cooperation of the candidates, we managed to get through 26. Good job. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Just about I have to close off. I saw you so anxious to come up here, but I forgot probably the most important part. And I, again, thank you for bearing with me through my cold and foggy brain tonight. So the closing comments will go in reverse order to the opening comments. Each candidate will have 3 minutes. The first candidate to end it off is Mr. Lake, Conservative Party of Canada.
Can I use my first few seconds to, can we give Ken a big round of applause? He's, and I'm just gonna start by thanking my two opponents. It's unfortunate we didn't have 5 of us up here tonight, but I thought this was fantastic. A great opportunity to have a meaningful conversation and you know, share. We clearly have some differing opinions and some similar opinions, and I agree with Ken that this is much more productive than question period is in the House of Commons. So I just want to kind of hammer home, I think, a few of the things that I said in my opening statement. You know, it's fitting, I think, today that I was sitting in the middle, because I think that the Conservative Party of Canada is probably the only center-right party, probably the only party anywhere near the center in Canada these days. You know, we have multiple parties now, including the Liberal Party, that seem to be fighting each other to see how far left they can go and how much bigger government can get and how much more intrusive government can be in our lives. And then you've got Max's party and Neil's party that is, kind of on its own on the far right. And I think that if you're looking for balance, and one of the things that I've always prided myself on as a member of parliament, as your member of parliament, is the fact that I try and take a balanced approach. I try and listen to all sides of the political conversation. I love at my roundtables when I get people from the left and people from the right, and I can kind of navigate that conversation to find the common ground, places where we agree, and we can kind of move in that direction. Those are things that I pride myself on. And when I take a look at our party's platform right now, I take a look at things that I think are common ground issues. Canadians want life to be more affordable for them. They want to spend less in taxes. They want a government that is there for the most vulnerable among us. They want balanced budgets because they understand that the things that are important to us, our healthcare, our social services, our education, we need those 10 years and 20 years from now, just like we need them now. And you only have to look back to the last Trudeau government, the Trudeau government of the 70s, to see what happens when a government runs deficits in 14 out of 15 years. And then when did we pay for that? We paid the cost for that in the late 90s when the Chrétien-Martin Liberals had to cut $35 billion from transfers for healthcare, social services, and education in this country. Devastating cuts that were felt from coast to coast because of deficits that were run year after year after year, generation earlier when I was a kid. And so these are the things that are important to me. I just want to close by thanking you for entrusting me as your member of parliament over the last 13 years, and I hope that you'll give me another 4 in this election. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wong?
Thank you, folks of Beaumont. I was received very well, I feel. Thank you. The October general election results will signal whether we go forward or backwards. We must not let Mr. Scheer and the Conservatives drag us back to the Harper years, where scientists and academics were muzzled, where our foreign reputations faltered, and where serious environmental issues were not their priority, nor were their timid stand on the LGBTQ issues. I need your help, Edmonton-Wetaskiwin, much help. I need you to speak to your relatives, your friends, and your people of influence about the Liberal message, my message. I believe in entrepreneurial and work success of the individual. I suppose you could call me a baby blue Liberal. I believe in compassion and in the community spirit of sharing to the less fortunate and needy. We will welcome immigrants to help build an even better Canada. Diversity makes us much stronger, economically and culturally. There's an adage, I believe it's from the Bible, I'm not 100% sure, but they say, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Unfortunately, in our current stormy political times, we cannot be meek. We must all be strong. I will be strong for you in Edmonton-Wetaskiwin, in our great province of Alberta, but most of all, for all of Canada. Thank you.
And final wrap-up, Mr. Dole.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you tonight. Thank you to Ken, and thank you to the audience. Mike mentioned that everybody's going left. I think their party's going right with them. I think he referred to us as far right. If you look at a CBC poll, came out about 6 months ago, it covered a lot of topics without party, and our party actually promotes policies that are supported by a majority, if not a very strong minority of the people in Canada, and we're just proposing common sense solutions. And one of the most important things, and I think Mike mentioned it, Mr. Lake, about listening. We also like to hear. Andrew Scheer today had a journalist kicked out of one of his rallies, and so that's a chance for us not to be able to listen to what a proposed leader is going to give us. And I wanted to sum it up tonight with sum up what we're talking about, and there was some news came on the TV, and it gave me a specific thing, and I could sum up all our policies and all our freedom of expression, and all, most importantly, the freedom of debate with climate change. And you can go to historical data and you can make your own trends and come to conclusions. And I was going to talk about that, but this global news report came out today where the vice president of the University of Alberta resigned today because after public outcry, including students and staff of the university, for an ad that came out that read, "Beefier barley, climate change will boost Alberta's barley yield with less water feeding more cattle." And that caused outrage. This statement originated from a U of A study with Global News, which had reported on in January of 2018 as well. And the issue highlighted for us in this story from right next door in Edmonton is that if you speak out against the establishment agenda, you will be canceled. I can't say the final fallout for that vice president will be, but judging for other people who speak out against the power leaders, social media won't be fun for the next few years for her. Of course, it looks like she's already apologized and pulled, and I did notice as well that her name and her existence on the university, you Google, the second hit was her name for the U of Alberta. It's now, "Sorry, this link doesn't exist." And it was released a couple days ago, and she resigned today. A fact backed up by science from her own university, not to mention just common sense, is what the ad was. She was silenced for stating a fact because that fact goes against the narrative, against I'm speeding up, for the story they've been building for 40 years, a story that shouts of impending doom that you just can't quite see yet, but is right around the corner, a story that has been repeated so loudly and so often that people are actually thinking they have witnessed this change. Except it's not true. Storms aren't worse, numbers aren't down, floods and droughts are within normal history, and temperature increases aren't accelerating, although the climate does change. We all admit that. We all know that. These statistics don't help transfer our hard-earned wealth to foreign bureaucrats to help build pet projects in foreign countries while so many people in our country need help. And this story isn't just about climate change. A local Conservative MP was banned and erased from history. The People's Party of Canada is an opportunity to vote for your values, vote for your country, vote for your voice. On the 21st, vote for Dole. Purple Rain.
Okay, so if you folks had as much fun tonight as I did, you're welcome to follow me on my Moderators Tour 2019. Tomorrow I'm going to Brooks. Wednesday I'm going to Medicine Hat. Next week I'm going to Ponoka, Lacombe, and Red Deer. The one thing all these forums have in common is that they're all hosted by Chambers of Commerce. That's what we do. And the other thing that's common with Chambers of Commerce meetings is we start on time and we end on time. So I'm going to call Lisa to the stage.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much, Ken. Let's give Ken Cobley another round of applause. Thank you for a stellar job at moderating for tonight's event. And I also want to thank the Beaumont Chamber of Commerce for putting on this event, for the volunteers that we have on hand tonight. Let's give them a round of applause. As well as the City of Beaumont, who supported us by providing the audiovisual, and to Invert 720 Productions for doing an awesome job at giving up all that we needed here to make this run smoothly. Let's give them a hand. I do want to say that during our meeting, just before the meeting started, we got a message from Noah Garver, the NDP candidate, to say that he could not make it due to a personal matter that prevented him from coming. We want to thank all of you for coming tonight. This would not be possible without you, obviously, and we're hoping that you got your questions answered. If you didn't, I'm sure all of our candidates would be happy to stick around, and we just want to thank all of you for coming tonight and for contributing and for being available to us as your constituents to make sure that our questions get answered or that we know exactly where you stand. So thank you, everyone, and stick around and mingle and get to know the candidates some more. Enjoy your evening. I forgot to mention a very important thing. The Beaumont Chamber of Commerce AGM is on Thursday at October 3rd, this Thursday at 12 o'clock. If you're interested in coming, we invite you to come for lunch as well.